into, called Cabergoline. What is Cabergoline? Well, it comes from an ergot fungus, and it is predominantly used in the treatment of high prolactin levels, hyperprolactinemia. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ryan, and this is the Thunder Channel on Nootropics, on TRT, on biohacking, and on male performance, and on a lot of other stuff. Frankly, please subscribe to the channel because look, hey bro, I know you're gonna love the content, so just hit the sub button now. All right, and guys, look, you either owe me a like or you don't owe me a like. You either owe me to hit the like button or you can move on. It depends on whether or not you get this right. So pick heads or tails. Pick it now. Pick it now. Let's flip it. All right, it landed on tails. If you pick tails, you're good to go. You can move on, and you don't owe me a like. But if you picked heads and you were wrong, you owe your boy a like. Do it now. Who are we? We are Cortex Labs, and we are predominantly a male performance optimization company that specializes in globally shipped nootropic stacks that are high level. The most popular of them is the Torque stack, and you can get it in the description of this video. I'm a consultant on TRT, nootropics, brain performance, energy, and lots of other things. Check out my specialties below or at livecortex.com. We got a bunch of nootropics courses and guides that are stack written also at the website. All right, now in this video, I'm going to talk about a very, very potent selective D2 agonist, which also has affinity for other neurotransmitter receptor sites, which I'm going to get into, called Cabergoline. What is Cabergoline? Well, it comes from an ergot fungus, and it is predominantly used in the treatment of high prolactin levels, hyperprolactinemia. Now, that could either be induced by an opioid receptor agonist like kratom or otherwise, or by a pituitary tumor, or by taking like, I don't know, some of the 19-nor anabolic steroids. The way that Cabergoline works for lowering prolactin is by binding to the D2 receptors that sit at the lactotropes in the pituitary where prolactin is secreted. Essentially, prolactin is under negative dopaminergic control, so dopamine inhibits prolactin secretion via binding right to the D2 receptors that sit on the cells that produce prolactin, and it's under positive serotonin and estrogen control, okay? So higher levels of estrogen going to stimulate prolactin release. Higher levels of serotonin going to stimulate prolactin release. We're going to talk about, a lot of things relative to Cabergoline, but let's first talk about libido. So, the predominant thing that Cabergoline does in aiding libido, well, it's doing two things. Number one, kind of acts as dopamine replacement. So it's not just D2 agonism, but it's also other dopamine receptors that it binds to and agonizes. So you have binding to dopamine receptors, which is going to kind of turn on that neurological dopamine response, which will improve libido. But at the same time, that's part of it. The predominant way that Cabergoline helps male libido is in lowering prolactin. I mean, you've heard of refractory period, right? That's the period after you orgasm within which you really don't want to have sex. You're not interested. You may have like a little bit of sort of temporary erectile dysfunction. And that's kind of like, prolactin is like the sexual satiety hormone. It does surge post-orgasm, whether it's masturbation or whether it's with a real person. You're talking about 10 to 20 nanograms per milliliter for 1 to 3 days. But what controls that is prolactin. Now, if you're using Cabergoline to lower prolactin levels via the D2 agonism in the pituitary and less prolactin secretion, well, then your refractory period is going to be less. So when you orgasm, you will be ready for sex sooner with Cabergoline in the mix and lower prolactin in the mix than if you didn't have it in the mix. Because again, post-orgasm, you're going to have surge in prolactin. It's going to stick around for a day or 2 or 3 days, depending on the person and the sort of, environment. But if you're inhibiting that release via Cabergoline, well, then you have a lower refractory period and you end up having higher libido. A lot of guys, by the way, will sit at 13, 14, 15 nanograms per milliliter, which is still in range, and top of the range is like 18, 19 nanograms per milliliter, but not have the best libido they can. But when they get the prolactin down to like 8 nanograms per milliliter, suddenly libido is much better. That's just something to look into. Like, it's not, there's a reference range for a reason, but if you're on the high end of the reference range or something, being lower in this case would actually be better. You don't want to crush it completely because there is some side effects associated with that, although there is no disease in the scientific literature associated with low prolactin in males. Now let's talk about Cabergoline in relation to SSRIs, right? I'm going to take you to the Wikipedia where there's an interesting paragraph that sort of describes the topic I want to touch on real quick. And it's in the off-label section, which goes, it has at times been used as adjunct to SSRI antidepressants, as there is some evidence that it counteracts certain side effects of those drugs, such as reduced libido and anorgasmia. Okay, so let's just stop there. Reduced libido on SSRIs is multifold. They're speeding up neurosteroid signaling, so you're down-regulating neurosteroid signaling. They're reducing pulsatile LH and FSH secretion, so you're ultimately going to have less androgens. However, remember, prolactin is under positive serotonergic control. So SSRIs are keeping far more synaptically available serotonin that's around extracellularly in the brain. So as a result, you have more substrate to stimulate the lactotropes to pump out prolactin. This is actually part of the anorgasmia, which is the inability to feel orgasms, the inability to feel sensation in your junk. This is part of why this happens to people on SSRIs. Whether or not your prolactin is in range now, post using the SSRI, it really doesn't matter, because if you were exposed to high levels of prolactin while you were on the SSRI, which you were almost definitely exposed to, then all kinds of things go wrong. Like as seen in this paper, hyperprolactinemia and 5-alpha reductase activity. By the way, high levels of prolactin consistently, if you're exposed to that, you're inhibiting 5-alpha reductase, just like dutasteride and finasteride, which, by the way, cause a similar sexual condition like SSRIs, where you have sexual muting, anorgasmia, genital sensations gone, you have no libido, erectile function is terrible. In this paper, they go, our data, on the other hand, confirm that 5-alpha reductase is inhibited by hyperprolactinemia. That's high levels of prolactin. Now, where cabergoline is useful, obviously, in this case, is it's multifold. It's preventing the prolactin increase, which would happen as a result of excessive serotonin in the synaptic extracellular spaces. It's keeping dopamine receptor activation prime, because on serotonergic drugs, you inhibit dopamine signaling and you're inhibiting dopamine receptor binding as well. And at the same time, via lowering prolactin, it's reducing the refractory period. So yes, it is useful. In fact, I think anyone on an SSRI should probably be simultaneously dosing, so long as they clear that with their doctor, a D2 agonist or something that lowers prolactin. You don't want the prolactin to get out of range. The prolactin inhibits the vasculature of the penis as well, and long exposure to hyperprolactinemia may cause vascular damage that you may need to use shockwave therapy or high-dose Cialis to then rehab thereafter. Now let's talk about all the affinities. So what's interesting about cabergoline, and gives question to some of its high doses, the safety of high doses of it, is that it's not just a D2 agonist. So as you see in the Wikipedia article, it actually has all the sites and its affinity for all these sites. Yeah, D2 full agonist, D2L, these are D2-like receptors, partial agonist, D3, D4 partial agonist. But then you look at some serotonin receptors and it actually has action there too. 5-HT1A, partial agonist. 5-HT1B, full agonist of the 5-HT1B receptor, guys. And that's where you've probably heard of cabergoline and cardiac valvulopathy. That's essentially the left ventricle reaching hypertrophy and essentially deteriorating. And the literature on that is actually very clear. You're talking about 3 to 5 milligrams very consistently, even more than that, of use of cabergoline, and then you have the potential to run into that issue. At the same time, a lot of the people that ran into that issue were simultaneously dosing levodopa, which is a Parkinson's drug. Either way, very high doses of cabergoline, not the doses that would take your libido up by lowering prolactin, or even reduce prolactin in the case of hyperprolactinemia induced by any drug or a pituitary adenoma, because really you're looking at 0.75 to 2 milligrams at the very, very highest. And in most of those cases, that's not causing, left valvular problems. Now, into the pharmacokinetics, what's really interesting about this D2 dopamine agonist versus some of the other dopamine agonists like bromocriptine. Bromocriptine is a dopamine agonist that's used in some of these similar conditions like hyperprolactinemia. Bromocriptine, as an example, you got to take once a day. And if you've got a high level prolactin, you may even be taking it twice a day, 3 times a day, and 7.5 milligrams. It comes in 2.5 milligram tablets. So that stuff is very short acting. It's 6-hour half-life. It's completely out of your system in 12 hours, something to this effect. Whereas cabergoline, has anywhere between a 50 and a 65-hour half-life. It has a very, very high affinity for the D2 receptors, and it stays binding to them, inhibiting prolactin release for a long time. This is why if you're sitting just above the reference range of prolactin, you're having sexual side effects, like you were on kratom, or you were on an SSRI, or you're taking something serotonergic, or something is causing your prolactin to secrete at high levels, cabergoline will rapidly lower the serum prolactin levels, right? It's just going to stop those lactotropes from pumping out PRL. Let's talk about side effects. So if you're wanting to use this recreationally to improve libido or to lower prolactin, maybe try to mess with like seeing if you can lower your refractory period and have like a, shorter time in between sex post orgasm, where a couple hours later you're kind of ready to go again, or however you want to end up, messing with Cabergoline. There definitely are side effects. Number one, GI side effects. So I've taken Cabergoline too. My prolactin was sitting at 17 nanograms per milliliter, which is still within range, but I wanted to see what it would do with my libido if I took it down to like 12 or 10 nanograms per milliliter. And it definitely did help. But, I got GI side effects from it, and that's pretty common. I was a little nauseous, and nausea is like one of the most predominant sort of side effects when taking Cabergoline. In fact, any D2 agonism at high levels, and this would also happen if you were taking ultra high doses of mucuna purines, like if you'd gotten mucuna powder and you were taking 15 grams plus, which I don't suggest unless you have Parkinson's disease, you're going to have GI issues. You're going to feel nauseous and you're not going to feel great. So Cabergoline has the ability to induce nausea. At the same time, the mechanism eludes me a little bit. It's actually hard to discern or find. There's some sort of neurological or intracranial blood pressure thing that's taking place with Cabergoline. This is why you really shouldn't be boozing or taking anything that lowers blood pressure or messes with blood pressure when you're taking Cabergoline, because it has the ability to essentially lower perhaps blood pressure generally, but also seemingly intracranial blood pressure. So you get dizzy, right? I mean, that's like you get a little vertigo, like kind of dizziness sort of stuff going on, maybe a little lightheaded, like not terrible, tends to go away if you continue to take the Cabergoline, but that's one of the main side effects of it as well. So aside from all the scientific stuff, like what is my personal take on Cabergoline? Well, yeah, look, I think it's a very useful tool if you were exposed to high levels of prolactin historically, even if they're in range now and you're suffering with ED and low libido, to see if you can take the prolactin down and maybe that helps. Again, there's modification of the androgen receptors. There's like 70 or something sites that PRL binds to in the human body. So we really don't know how long prolactin is binding or hanging around at receptor sites. There is such a thing as like if you're exposed to high levels of something for a long period of time and then you get the levels down within the blood, there's still this lag period before you actually start to see symptom relief. And that has to do with the receptor sites not internalizing. There's a process called internalization, which is relative to downregulation, which happens eventually after there's not hardcore agonism of that receptor. This is only for some receptor sites. So it's possible that prolactin receptors, especially where they inhibit sexual function, which is neurologically as well as in the penile. I'm not sure if there's prolactin receptors in the penis, but I bet there is. There certainly are in the brain. Those receptors may be kind of continually activated thereafter and, inhibiting your libido and erection quality, which is why if you had, high level prolactin at some point, it may be a good idea for you to be taking Cabergoline now. Obviously, if you have a pituitary adenoma, that's the first line treatment. There's some other things that lower prolactin. P5P would obviously be one of them, but it's unlikely to lower prolactin enough when you've got this hypersecretion via this hyperplasia and this overgrowth of lactotrope cells in a tumor. This is ultimately what a tumor is, particular type of cells that grow out of control. I don't think P5P would be very useful in that case. Recreationally used, if you don't really have or haven't had hyperprolactinemia or high prolactin for a long period of time, recreationally used to increase libido via decreasing refractory period, via lowering, your already normal serum prolactin levels. Look, that's just something that people experiment with. I'm not telling you to do it. I've given you the safety markers, kind of the scientific spiel about how it's working. I've done it and it worked for my libido, and it made erections like a little firmer. And I didn't really have any major side effects except for a little bit of nausea. That was basically it. And it works very quickly. I mean, my prolactin went from, 17 something down to ultimately down to 8 nanograms per milliliter, and that happened very quickly. There are some stimulatory effects of Cabergoline, in some sense, based on all of the dopamine receptors it's binding to and how potent it is at the D2 receptor, it's somewhat dopamine replacement. When you take it, you probably be a little amped up, maybe a little energized. You get that dopaminergic feeling to be motivated to do stuff. You generally have energy. I'm not saying that's a good thing and you should continue taking Cabergoline. I'm just saying, that's just something to maybe look out for or consider. I think if you're someone that is using it recreationally, strategically to lower prolactin, to therefore lower refractory period, get better libido, erection quality, sensation, right? Maybe you've got muted orgasms and you want to try to approach, resolving it or getting some alleviation this way. I think best case scenario, stay under 1 milligram a week, stay under 1 milligram a week, and also cycle off of the stuff, right? If you're going to use it experimentally, see how it affects you, give it 4 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe even 12 weeks is fine, and then cycle off of it for a few weeks to a month. And then if you need to rerun a cycle of it thereafter, go for it. But again, if you're not hypersecreting prolactin via a tumor, you're not going to need to continue taking Cabergoline. All right, I hope I've dispelled some myths about, the cardiac, like left ventricular hypertrophy stuff. Again, you got to be taking very high doses of it in order for that to even happen. But also given you, the mechanistic point of view of exactly what it's doing, both from the D2 agonist perspective as well as the 5-HT1A agonist perspective and the 5-HT, 1B or 2B antagonist perspective. And for those of you that, maybe using it for, maybe you're on a steroid cycle and the steroid cycle is pumping up your prolactin past range and that's messing with your libido and erection quality, which it definitely will. Maybe Cabergoline's a good thing to be taking at that time. And again, people on SSRIs, you may want to talk to your doctor about that, but that may be a good way to prevent some of the sexual side effects, because there's no question that the extra serotonin is causing extra prolactin, and that is really wreaking havoc on the sexual system of a man, even if prolactin's in range thereafter. Look, if you need to hire me on any of these topics, like maybe you have PSSD and you're kind of thinking about, was my prolactin high, or it definitely was and I've got to figure this out, or you're wanting to take Cabergoline, or any of the stuff we talk about, my specialty is in pharmacology generally, but also in the neuroscience of nootropics, the optimization of testosterone replacement therapy protocols via finely tuning and dialing in, all of the hormones, not just, testosterone, estradiol, but also prolactin, also allopregnanolone, also progesterone, DHEA, pregnenolone. All these hormones really matter when dialing in your protocol. And a host of other specialties. You can check out what I do at livecortex.com or down in the description of this video. You can hire me for email consultations, for calls, and, big programs too. The most popular nootropic stack on the web, and I say this because I don't see any other company selling more product, and we're just blowing out of inventory, have to constantly buy more and buy larger quantities, is the Torque stack. It just hit fire when it reached, because people like 6 to 8 hours of clean stimulant energy and a dependable nootropic stack, right? You take 2 capsules, like that's it. You don't have to worry about it. You take 2 capsules, brain turns on, you have energy, you feel great, your mood's elevated, you're like happy, but you're productive and you have that dopamine kind of brain function. Look, go buy Torque. It's in the description of this video or at livecortex.com. And if you picked heads and this thing landed on tails, you owe your boy a like. Hit the like button now, bro, because you got it wrong. But if you were right, you can move on and enjoy the rest of your day. Everybody else, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for watching. More content comes soon, and I will talk to you on the next one.